Well, Hollis, we got Daniel on the line. What do you want to ask him?
A big thing for me is educating people who don't know anything about real estate, right? They've never been a private money lender. They've never purchased any real estate. Maybe they don't even own their own home yet. For people like that, where do they start?
First and foremost, I'd say change your mentality. And a lot of that comes from changing who you surround yourself with. I think that's probably one of the
Yeah.
most important things that people really underestimate.
I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this podcast is different than everything else out there. I bring together a new and an experienced investor on each episode, and I let the aspiring investor ask the questions that they need answered. So if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you probably will have the exact same questions. Now, before we get to this episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button below and that little bell to make sure you get notified every time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Streamline Capital Group. Very excited for today's show. We got two amazing people on the line with us. We got our experienced investor, Daniel Kwak, and our aspiring investor, William Hollis. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having us on.
As is tradition, what we typically do is we spend some time with our experienced investor first. So, Daniel, you're up to the plate first. Love my baseball references for some reason. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I love it. By the way, I love the sports analogies too, but I'm a lifelong martial artist. So I always tell people, like, when you do your first deal, it's a lot like your first fight. You have to train for it. You have to prepare. You can't just get in there, or otherwise you're going to get knocked out. My background is I'm an immigrant originally from South Korea. And I love sharing my story because a lot of people say, well, I don't have this to make me successful, and that person had that. And we literally had nothing. If you're able to speak English, congratulations. You have an advantage over me when I first started. It was not the most luxurious life, I guess you could say. Poor, I always tell people, was an understatement to describe our background. I still have memories of being 5, 6, 7 years old. And, we slept in the car some nights because we couldn't afford to pay the heating bill. I loved going to school because it meant I got to eat. There were a lot of interesting stories in between, but fast forward, when you grow up poor, you learn poor. Being 18 years old, I had negative $187.65 in my bank account. Had very little credit, and the little credit I had was bad credit. I had maxed out credit cards, and I found myself one night having to dig through the dumpster to look for something to eat. And that's when I realized I wanted to do something about it. And I had a flashback in that moment of when I was 17 years old. I read an article from Forbes magazine saying that out of the top 1% of people in the world, something like 75 or 76% of those people made their money investing into real estate. So I said, that's the route that I got to go. And ever since I was younger, I've always wanted to make a lot of money, not for myself, but to help other people. I immediately, as a kid, recognized it as a resource to feed others, to build for others, and make an impact. So got into real estate at 18, 19 years old. And I bought every single course you can imagine. I went to every book, every seminar. I mean, when Eric Thomas in his infamous video says, you got to want success as bad as you want to breathe, that was me. I was inhaling real estate investing content along with finance content in general. That led me to being 23 years old, and I ended up with 87 doors. Most of them, a high majority of them being multifamily. And I'm 28 now. And so my brother and I, we have a portfolio of not just apartment buildings, but also a portfolio of businesses as well. So that's a little bit of my background and a brief, I guess, version of my story.
So very much, a lot of people call it kind of the rags to riches story. And I mean, you're pulling on my heartstrings there, where you went to school because you wanted to eat. And I thought I grew up poor because I was on reduced price lunch when I was in elementary school. Kudos for you for coming. I mean, for doing what you did, for overcoming, South Korea to the United States. That's a long trip, and that's a huge difference in culture as well. So, new language, new culture, new everything. And then speaking of culture, going from the poor culture to the wealth culture is huge as well. I mean, I like what you say, where you grew up poor and so you knew poor, and that's, I think, one of the biggest disadvantages that people who grew up poor have is that's what they learn about money. So you're now in business with your brother. You guys have several different businesses. You've got a really great YouTube channel. Tell us a little bit about what you guys do overall.
Yeah. So overall, I'd say whether it's real estate, whether it's, businesses, whether it's our YouTube channel, we find ways to create value for other people. The formula for scaling an apartment building, like if, for example, if you were buying a distressed apartment building and, you're wanting to increase the rent and therefore increase the value add strategy, as we call it, or, if you wanted to scale a business, there's so many similarities in both. I'll go back to my sports analogy. It's a lot like the difference between Taekwondo and Muay Thai, right? I mean, you're literally kicking the same, right? But just little tweaks here and there. So, with business, right, if you focus on adding value with other people. So for example, my job as, a leader in the Kwak brothers is to put people in the best positions to succeed. And I learned very quickly that as a real estate investor, especially if you're syndicating apartments, the apartment strategy, the apartment asset demands for you to think of real estate as a business. If you're doing a single family house, if you're doing a duplex, if you're doing a triplex, you can kind of get away with, I'm just doing deals, that type of mentality. But the minute you start going after 20, 30, 40, 50 units, and you start going after deals that are, in the 150, the 200, 300, at the end of the day, you're more so buying an income stream. You're not buying a piece of property.
Yeah.
You're buying an income stream that has customers. You're buying an income stream that requires a team to maintain and solidify and grow that income stream. So, for me, if my mentality as a leader here at the Kwak brothers, with all the businesses that we have in our portfolio, is to help people be in the best positions to succeed and provide the framework and the vision, I can apply that same tactic in real estate. By putting my maintenance guy in the best position to succeed, by putting my property manager in the best position to succeed. And honestly, a lot of that can just come from sitting down with the individual one-on-one and go, hey, Jason, you're my property manager. What do you need from me as the owner to really help you win, to really help you crush it the next 3 to 6 months? What connections do you need me to make? Where do you need me to allocate, money or equity? What phone calls do I need to make so that your job can be the easiest? That's one of the things I really learned. And to answer your question, that's what we really do. That's what my day-to-day looks like.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Now, something you mentioned resonated with me, and I think a lot of people on this podcast as well. You talked about when you scale, you got to treat it like a business. I had a partner. We're no longer partnered together as a company, but we still have partners on several deals. But he used to say that we were all real estate hobbyists before we got our first syndication. I had a whole bunch of single family homes, but none of us treated it as a business. And I think you're absolutely right. When you go from that single family mentality to I'm going to syndicate something, now you have to start treating it like a business. And then the other thing you said I really, really appreciate is being able to leverage other people, being able to put the right people in the right place in the right system to be able to perform the task and do whatever needs to be done to run the business. I think that's amazing as well.
You can actually take that logic and really take that mentality with anything else. If you're trying to raise capital, if you're trying to negotiate with sellers, even just having the mentality of how can I put this individual in the best position to succeed allows you to develop psychographics. So, I have a really good friend who's a phenomenal marketer. And I asked him, like, hey, why are you such a great marketer? Why are you so good at demanding attention from other individuals in a world where everything is clawing for our attention? And he goes, Daniel, I'm a great marketer because I don't focus on demographics. I don't focus on geographics. I always focus on psychographics. If I can hone in and really focus on how people think and what makes them make certain decisions, I know I can win the deal. I think that way when I'm raising capital is, what is the psychographics of this individual? What do they value the most? What do they want? And at the end of the day, what's going to get them to go to sleep at night significantly, less stressed than they were the night before. And I take that mentality with sellers, with investors, with people that work for me. And it's just amazing how much troubles you can avoid and how much faster you can go.
Yeah, I love it. Something I need to work on definitely is psychographics. I love that. Love that term. Never heard that term before. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about one of the real estate projects you've been involved with. Tell us a little bit about the property, the business plan, and how it's panned out.
Yeah, I'll talk about the one. So I don't talk about this one a lot, right? But I'll talk about the one that I had the most fun and was the most eventful. It was an 8-unit complex, and it was actually one of my very first apartment deals. I think back in 2017, 18, before, asset prices really peaked out, we were in a rhythm where we were buying an apartment every month. So we were raising capital. We had a great system, a great structure going. But this was one of our first ones. So I remember getting a call, and one of the ways I would find deals was, this is by far one of my favorite ways to find deals. So is it okay if I actually take some time to share the technique, share the tactic with you? Perfect.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I used to do is, accordance to psychographics, is I used to build relationships with property managers. And one of the things that I would do is I'd sit down with them and I'd ask them, hey, what are some of your biggest struggles and obstacles you have with your business? And, one of the most common answers I got was, well, I don't like it when sellers sell their building because they always leave my management account. And, I would ask them questions like, well, what's the minimum number of units under management you have to have for your business to stay afloat? And they would always give me a number like, 150 or 80, or depending on the size of the firm, right? I sat down with a bunch of managers and I said, how would you like for me to create a scenario where virtually you never go below the number you're at right now? And their ears perk up, right? They get interested. So I would tell them, hey, let's create this arrangement where next time you have a client that wants to sell, have them call me first. Chances are I'll put together a really cool, lucrative offer, right? Like based on what they're looking for. And if you're a good manager, I'll hire you. And if things don't work out between the two of us, and through my vetting process, I realize that I don't want to do business with you. Worst case scenario, you make a 2% commission as a broker, as a managing broker in the state of Illinois. So you're gonna win-win either way, right? With me, regardless, right? And here's the money I've raised. Here's here are my investors. Here's the commitments that they've given me, and here's my business plan, all this stuff. So that's how I found this deal. I got a call from this property manager, and he goes, "Hey, this guy initially called me for my management services, but I remembered our conversations we had a couple months ago, and I simply asked him if he wanted to sell the building. So." Here you go, and he was a guy that actually bought the building in the 80s, and he bought it because he was a business owner making ridiculous amounts of money, and his CPA and his tax professional told him that he needed to buy into real estate to alleviate some of his tax consequences, right? To alleviate some of his tax pressures, which that's why a lot of people get into multifamily, right? Especially physicians and high net worth individuals. They love being passive and limited partners for that reason. So we checked out the building on Tuesday, and we were able to meet his needs so well that we bought the building on seller financing, and we bought the building no money down. He had bought the building for $250,000 in the mid 80s. And that's exactly what we bought it for in 2017 when we did this deal. We bought it for $250,000, zero money down, 4% interest, 20-year amortization. And
how many units was this?
So this was 8 units. And now don't get me wrong, it was a mess, right? So there was garbage everywhere in the front lawn. No one was paying rent, right? So there was 3 people squatting, right? And one tenant was renting out the other 2 units to 2 other tenants and collecting rent somehow. One unit was stealing electricity from another. It was just a mess. And there was a hot water tank that burst in one of the top units and flooded 2 of the bottom units. So when I checked it out, it was one of those situations where, my shoes, when I step on the carpet, it creates like the right, like the slush sound. And so it was a lot of work, right? But we got it for $240,000. And what's funny is I had a friend of mine who owned the 8-unit building right across the street, and he had just sold his for $570,000. So, I was like, okay, I'm getting a deal. So we saw it on Tuesday, and since it was owner financing, no money down, we closed actually that Friday. So what was interesting is when we went to the closing table, the seller was there, and I don't know if you guys are horologists, meaning that you guys are big into watches, but the watch he had on was a Rolex Submariner 2 original series, which those used will go for like $9,000-$10,000, and he had a brand spanking new one. I mean, it was one of the collectors, right? So this guy was not hurting for money by any means. So he didn't care necessarily about the money that he was making. But the biggest thing that I found out, and myself and my partner talking with him, is his biggest headache in that deal, and the reason why he wanted to get rid of it was because the city had ordered him to court the next Tuesday. And so for him, he's like, I don't want to go to court for this thing that I barely even touch. Like I have I make so much money outside of this building. So that's why we close on a Friday, is because, hey, if you want us to put some money down, we need some time to raise the capital. So we're not going to be able to go to court for you as the new owners, because for him, that was the big thing that he wanted us to do, is, hey, buy the building and go to court for me, because I don't want to spend my time. That's how we got it no money down. So we ended up raising $150,000 for the rehab, right? So we fixed it. We fixed everything up. We raised the rents. All the units were 2-bedroom, 1 bath. We got it up to market rent, which was $950 per unit. And when it was all said and done, that thing was cash flowing $4,800 a month. And I exited out of that deal in 2021 at almost the peak of the market. So, we bought it for $250,000. I cashed out at a valuation, I think, around $725,000.
Nice. A lot of good points I want to highlight there. Property managers. A lot of people come on this show, and I think, having been on the ownership side a lot, you typically tell your property manager when you're going to sell. It's like, hey, property manager, we're going to sell in about 6 months. So let's stabilize income. Let's make sure that we're not, going overboard on expenses and whatnot. And one thing that you're taking advantage is the fact that the property managers are typically going to be the first people to know, that something's going to be sold. And
that's exactly right.
building the relationship with them to get them to call you is huge. And that is like the true off-market deal right there.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
um,
another reason why I did it as well is
mhm,
because, I had gotten really frustrated up to that point because,
mhm,
a lot of apartment guys will understand what I'm talking about. But when they get the offering memorandum from the broker, the numbers aren't necessarily the most accurate all the time.
yeah.
They hedge the expenses a little bit, right? They
They put their
posture,
rose-colored glasses is what I
they
mean,
put
yeah.
that's exactly right.
This
And
is what
what's
it could be, in a
That's
perfect
exactly right,
world.
Brian. Yeah,
Yeah.
Brian, you're on the money, Brian. So, I mean, I remember I read a statistic, right? Like, I think the average expense ratio that I was seeing from brokers was like 36%, right? With all these
Mhm.
apartment deals. But yet, if you look at the multifamily, the National Multifamily Housing Council, they actually said for Class B and C apartments, the average expense ratio is 47.3. That kind of gives you a discrepancy of how off brokers can be sometimes with their evaluation. So the
Yeah.
reason why I started working with property managers as well is because I knew that they knew the expenses and income better than anybody else. Most property management companies use like Yardi or Buildium or Appfolio. So what oftentimes when I would ask for the numbers, they would literally just send me screenshots of their Buildium or their Yardi or their
Yeah.
Appfolio records of that building. So I got to see the expenses and the income for what they really were, aside from what the broker was just trying to tell me.
That's big too. And I mean, when you talk about the property management company, the other thing you mentioned is, hey, if you're a good management company, we're going to keep you on. You're really at every point of that story, you're doing exactly what you said. You're looking at people's
Yeah.
interests. You're looking at what they want to get out of the psychographics, I think is what you call it. You're looking at the psychographics, and everything about that story goes into that. Working with the property manager to get them to call you first, working with the owner to figure out what he wants. And bold move, buying on a Friday and showing up to court on a Tuesday. I bet it was pretty easy for you. You're like, hey, we just bought this property. We'll take care of it. Thanks, Judge. Just curious, how did that court appearance go?
Yeah, so I actually didn't go. My property manager went for me. So
Okay.
I actually gave him a bit of the equity in the deal for finding it and managing it, and then he also brokered it as well for bits and pieces here and there. So he actually showed up to court for me. So I was able to. One of the things I was really good at as well, ever since I was young, is I was always very good at creating people around me and having a
Mhm.
team,
Yeah.
and really focusing on what I wanted to do and what I was really good at. Which was kind of just outlining the strategy, raising the money, underwriting, right? Like these are things that I just enjoyed doing. So he didn't mind. And he was an individual who had been in that city for, gosh, I think over 35 years. So he knew the
Oh,
judge already, and he knew, all the aldermen, and, he already had those relationships, as opposed to, this young kid, which at the time I was, 23 showing up.
mhm.
I mean, I'm glad he went instead of me. He did a much better job than I would have.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, hey, good. So, question I ask everybody coming on the show, we're shifting gears just slightly. What is your motivation? What's your big burning why?
Yeah. So I think about 2 or 3 years ago, I would have told you, I want to build at least 50 hospitals around the world. I want to fund and sponsor at least 1 million children, right? Like I would have given you all these answers, financial freedom, like help, whatever, right? A little bit of background about me is, I'm a follower of Christ. My dad's a pastor, but for me personally, I am a follower of Jesus. And one of the things that is very important for who I am is that I have this belief that followers of Jesus are not driven, but we're led. So again, I hope I don't get too preachy here. And if I am, please feel free to stop me. But, one of the things that is repeated in scripture, when people ask Jesus, hey, what are you doing here? He says, I only do as I see my Father doing.
Mhm.
And it talks about in scripture that we as followers should emulate that. So for me, I wake up every single morning. I kind of go, all right, God, what do you want me to do today? Who do you want me to help? Who do you want me to love and serve today? And it's really kind of my mentality, every single day. And I'm fortunate that God has wired me in a way where I love business. I love, I truly believe that business is the greatest way to help serve and impact people. I truly believe that, more than nonprofit organizations, more than churches, more than anything else. I mean, you look at such big companies like Facebook, Amazon, and the impact that they have on their surrounding communities. For me, that's what I'm all about. So I know it's a very non-traditional answer, but I wouldn't say I'm an individual that's very excited about being driven by anything or chasing
Mhm.
something or having a why. I'm more so led every single day, and I love it. Every day is a new adventure.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, especially, I'm also a follower of Christ, so very much appreciate what you said on there. Something I've noticed, a long time ago, and going into the Christian theme a little, I mean, Christ told us to help our brethren, our
Yeah.
brothers, and our sisters, and to reach out to those who are less fortunate. One thing I realized a long time ago, is People look at that. There's another New Testament scripture. I can't tell you where it is. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. And a lot of people look at that and misrepresent it, saying that money is evil. I think what I realized several years ago is the more money you have, the more people you can help, which is amazing. And you're right. You pointed to the impact a lot of these big organizations have. It's because they have a lot of capital, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of influence. And if we want to help other people and help the most people possible, we got to grow our own influence. Appreciate you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Last question for you. What's next?
Yeah, well, I think I'll probably go back to my earlier answer is, I don't know, whatever he says, whatever the Father asks of me. I'm learning, right? At 28 years old, I'm learning what it means for God to be enough. Because I think for a lot of Christians who, go to church and they say all the right things and they're nice Christian Boy Scouts, a lot of them, for them, it's like, oh, like I want to do things, for God and build churches and hospitals and all these things. And for me, I celebrate the things that I get to do with God, not for God. That for me is what I've come to enjoy, because for a lot of people, it's God plus their business, God plus their marriage, God plus so many things. And as the Holy Spirit, as they call it, right, has been teaching me and guiding me and instructing me is, hey, is God alone enough for you to be excited about living every single day? And I'm learning and I'm moving towards that every single day. So I guess for me, that's next.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate that. And keep on waking up and doing that same thing, and God will bless you, I'm sure. So switching gears again, we got Hollis here waiting on the line with us, and he's been very patient. So Hollis, welcome to the show. You're up.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So do us a favor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Hollis from Hollis, Queens, believe it or not. Grew up 2 blocks over from Hollis Avenue. In fact, my junior high school was on Hollis Avenue, so that's why everybody calls me by my last name. I got into real estate through wholesaling about 4, maybe 5 years ago, and I'll get into why I started there in a bit. But I basically started a business doing that with a buddy of mine, and we did several transactions through that, started our business. We're scaling there, but I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with wholesaling, but it's really another W-2 type of job.
It's very transactional.
As soon as you punch out, as soon as you punch out, that money stops coming in. So by trade, I'm actually a software engineer. So I already have a 9-to-5 job, really, probably a little bit more than 9 to 5, to be honest, right? Wholesaling was kind of putting me further into the rat race, I felt like. And it wasn't bringing me towards my goals of, having that passive income and really benefiting from real estate or investing in real estate, right? Because most of the wholesale transactions, I wasn't, keeping them or transact. I was just flipping it to another, flipping the contract. So I started looking at how to acquire some buildings, right? To keep some of these properties. I live in Connecticut now. Northeastern real estate is pretty expensive. When I happen to live in one of the most expensive counties in the United States. I don't know who has the money, but somebody does up here. So
people who bought 30 years ago, probably. But I mean, prices only go up to the point to where people can afford. So if nobody can afford it, prices are coming down. So somebody can.
Somebody's buying these properties, man. So I was trying to be one of them. I was trying to buy some property. And so I had to start looking for capital, because I wouldn't be able to take down, even, just say a 2-family here. In some areas, you could buy a 2-family for over $500,000, right? And that's only 2 doors. And obviously that cash flow is limited because you only have, 2 potential tenants there. So the spreads just weren't there in those smaller properties. So I started looking at commercial sized, larger size deals. And with that came more capital that needed to be raised. And so that kind of brought me to where I am now with my company, 24 Capital Group, doing private equity for real estate and, helping people to diversify their portfolios into real estate.
Love it. Now, question everybody gets, and you're no exception. So here it comes. What is your big burning why?
Yeah, so I have 2 of them, and one of them dates back to when I was a kid. Similar to Daniel, I grew up pretty poor. I never slept in the car, but sometimes we just did without the heat type of thing. The person who I always knew had money was my landlord. This is back in the 90s. Every first of the month, he's coming around, whether we had the money or not, and collecting collecting
Mhm.
money, right? So he has this wallet, fattest wallet I've ever seen to this day. Dude couldn't even sit down on his wallet. It was so big. Hundreds just spilling out of his wallet. So
Mhm.
7-year-old me is looking at Mr. Carter was his name. And I'm thinking,
Mm.
I don't know how Mr. Carter owns all this property, but that's the way to do it. Whatever he's
Yeah.
doing, he's doing it right. Being in that neighborhood, obviously kind of if you think typical inner city, whatever you're imagining from the movies, that's where I grew up. There was no way, there was no path for me, clear
Mhm.
path that I could understand to get to where Mr. Carter was until my buddy told me about wholesaling a couple of years ago. He took me to this conference and it blew my mind. I was like, oh, wow, I can participate in real estate and
Mhm.
I don't need, $250,000 to get started. That brings me back to my why is being able to provide people with access to opportunities and educate them on what opportunities are out there that they don't necessarily know they have access to. And even if that's not
Mhm.
investing through my firm, I mean, we do mostly syndication. So there is some barrier to entry there, but there's a lot of crowdfunding websites out there where you can participate in real estate deals. I mean, you can get into real estate now. It's a lot more accessible.
Yeah.
It just requires a bit of a mindset shift and knowledge and education. So
Absolutely.
providing access to opportunities to people who are kind of, have a similar story to me, or maybe even not, but just educating people on that is a huge why for me. And then the second one has to do with my son.
Mm.
My son is 9 months old now.
Mhm.
I wasn't planning on having any children ever, but I have a son now. And thinking back to, again, growing up, the reason I'm here on this podcast with you guys right now is my mom had a very lucrative career. She stopped working so that she could be at home with my brother, my sister, and I. Just because living where we lived, that was such a crucial element. And I look at some of my peers who didn't have anyone make that sacrifice for them, and they're not in the place that I am now. Having a son of my own, even though I don't live in that neighborhood anymore, and it's a different type of circumstance for him, but I would like to have the freedom to be there for him, for my wife and I to be there for
Yeah.
him the way that my parents were for me.
Awesome. Love it. All right. Well, Hollis, we got Daniel on the line. What do you want to ask him?
Daniel, you could tell your story really resonated with me. I really liked a lot of the things that you said. A big thing for me is educating people who don't know anything about real estate, right? They've never been a private money lender. They've never purchased anything, any real estate. Maybe they don't even own their own home yet. So for people like that, where do they start?
Mhm.
Could you pick maybe 3 things that a person should learn before they start investing in real estate or as they start investing in real estate?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost,
Yeah.
man, it's an honor for me to be connected with you, Hollis. I think it's amazing that all three of us kind of share a lot of similarities in our background, in our story. And I know we were kind of joking about this beforehand, but if you look at who we are in our race, but yet all
Mhm.
of us have such similarities in our background and how we grew up and how we came up. I think that's such a beautiful thing, because it just shows you how much opportunity and value sees no color. It doesn't see, a lot of these things. So my advice to a lot of people starting out is first and foremost, change your mentality. I think that's the first thing. I remember being super frustrated because believe it or not, I used to coach people in real estate for free. Right. So now I do charge, but I used to coach people for free and nobody would take it seriously. I remember there was a
Yeah.
group of 60 people that I would coach on a weekly basis and nobody did a thing. And I remember
Mhm.
getting so frustrated. And I remember somebody told me, they were in their 50s and, he goes, Daniel, it's hard for someone in their 20s to be focused about investing when every Friday night they're going out to the club and drinking and there's women around and all this stuff. And he goes, would you be focused if you were in that situation? And I said, no, not really. First and foremost, I'd say change your mentality. And a lot of that comes from changing who you surround yourself with. I think that's probably one of the
Yeah.
most important things that people really underestimate. And it's one of those things where people say it all the time, but very few actually know what it means and actually do it. And, a lot of people will kind of say, well, Daniel, I didn't grow up in the right side of town. I don't have the right people around me. And I completely understand. I went to a small private school. My dad was a pastor. I didn't know anybody that knew a lot about real estate or even knew what real estate was for that matter. So a
Mhm.
lot of the beginning of my career was going to as many networking events as I can find and seeing the most successful people and telling them, hey, can I work for you for free? I just want to be around. I just want to hang out with you. I just want to see money and real estate through your eyes. I'd say that's probably one of the most important things I'd say is change your mentality, who you surround yourself with, and identify 2 or 3 people that you can just hang
Yeah.
out with at all times and really adopt how they view money and real estate. And then from then on, that's when you can start adding on the technical information, I think.
It change who you hang out with is huge. I mean, when I was starting out, I mean, I would go to whoever I want, whoever I knew. I went to my first inner circle to start raising capital, to start, peddling my wares, so to speak. And what I realized, very, very quickly is, I didn't have the network to be able to syndicate. I didn't have the network to be able to raise capital. It didn't take me a lot of time to figure out, hey, if I'm going to make it in this business, I've got to start putting myself around the people who can invest. I got to start putting myself around people who are kind of at the next level financially. Definitely endorse what Daniel said. And
Yeah, those are two really good points. And it's so interesting you say that about mindset. I consider myself to be very entrepreneurial minded. I've owned a few businesses and have had success with most of them. Some did fail, but even still, coming into commercial real estate, it took another change of mindset again, because the numbers and the concepts you're dealing with are so large, right? You talk about raising, let's say, even a small raise of $1 million to somebody, like people like us who maybe didn't grow up with knowing anybody who had $1 million, wrapping my mind around the fact that, man, I can go out there and find $1 million through my network was huge.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you guys when it comes to mindset. Real quick, any books you guys recommend that can help with that mindset shift?
Yeah. Obviously there's the classic ones, right? Like Think and Grow Rich. I think that's probably a book I've read, 5 or 6 times. I love, there are certain books like, The One Thing by Keller. There's a lot of other entrepreneurial books, right? Like The Richest Man in Babylon. I really enjoyed that one. And there's a flurry, right? I'm just like kind of turning around like, oh, what did I read? Right.
looking at his
A
shelf
lot
right
of
there.
Simon
Yeah.
Sinek. Yeah, for sure. Like Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, Jim Collins, right? Stephen Covey, right? Obviously Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? Like you can't really go wrong with any one of those. For me, where I got the biggest mindset shift was just in the relationships that I had with people. Because I noticed that at 18, 19, 20 years old, one of the things that I was always told is, oh man, like what I wouldn't give to be your age right now. Like I would just hear that constantly, because I noticed that when I would go to these seminars and these networking events, a lot of people were older than I am. And so that's one of the observations that people constantly made. And there was one quote that I heard that just like completely floored me. And I don't know who the originator of this quote is, but the quote kind of goes to have what you've never had. You got to learn what you've never have learned. You have to do what you've never have done. But most importantly, you have to be who you never have been. Ever since hearing that, I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to change who I am, right? Whether it's character, intellect, whether it's my mentality, whether it's who I hang out with, like I have to really revamp everything. Who I am right now is not ready for the results of what I desire for the next level.
Yeah.
I'd say that quote really floored me. And in all those books I mentioned, you really can't go wrong with any one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking at books, I think the one that's had the most impact on my mindset would probably be Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. And just reading through that many, many times, I mean, if you really start paying attention, I think one of the phrases he puts in there is between stimulus and response. What makes humans different is we choose our response. We choose what our action is going to be. We choose to act and not react. Just that kind of opened my mind to a lot of things. Just like, I don't have to get mad. That's one that's definitely helped me. And then if you're talking about books, that as far as mindset, if you're talking about books that have helped me in my life, for me, the Bible and the Book of Mormon are the two that nailed on there. But Daniel said something that also rings very, very true, is I've had more mindset shifts from people than I've had from books, from talking with people, seeing what other people have done. And, they many times I've had people help me connect the dots where, reading hours and hours and hours in books or hundreds or thousands of pages wouldn't have done. All right, also, we got time for one more question if you got another one or
awesome,
follow up on this
awesome.
one.
Yeah. I'll throw one more out there. This is kind of more on the technical side. I'll just leave it to you, Daniel. What are some of the tools you use for market analysis when you're choosing which markets to invest in? Total shift, I know, but it's one of my list here.
I'm sure Brian will have a great answer for this one as well. The way I've done personally is I've done a lot of intentionality in building relationships around the country. One of the things that I do is I just stay in touch with people all around the country, right? So whether it's California, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, or East Coast, West Coast, right, North, South, you name it. I've been very intentional over the years about building those relationships and really in maintaining those relationships, just catching up. I ask, hey, what's going on in your market? How are things over there on your guys' end? What's supply? Do you see a lot of capital being infused to your guys' local area? What are you guys seeing? And as much as I do read stuff like annual reports, like Marcus Milchat puts out an annual report for apartments. I'm sure Brian gets his hand on that as well. Like there's a lot of reports that I read, and then obviously a lot of platforms that I follow, right? Like Narada Real Estate, Berkadia, like ULI, like a lot of these big real estate companies put out really good reports. I watch a lot of different YouTubers that talk about the housing market and real estate market. A lot of them are my friends, and I've had the fortune of having them on my channel, right? Like the Jason Hartmans of the world, the George Gammons, the Ken McElroys, Brandon Turner is a good friend of mine, all these guys. So between YouTube, the reports, and then just me having dialogue with people that are actually there doing business, I found that to be so much more valuable than anything I've done is, having these buddies of mine that are property managers, attorneys, lenders, realtors in these areas that I'm interested in. They give me more info probably in 30 minutes that I could get in 3 hours of reading these reports, because these guys are the ones doing those transactions and they're noticing, well, the data says this, but here's kind of the context of that data. Because I'll regularly call up people where I'm doing deals and go, hey, buddy, I just read this report, but it says that your area is doing this. Is this true? And oftentimes I find myself getting a different answer. So that's what I do personally for market analysis. I'm sure Brian's got a great answer as well. So
yeah, I hope my answer is as good as yours. But I'll tell you what, we've been involved, or I've been involved through a company called Four Oaks in a lot of deals in tertiary markets. And what I've learned from that is tertiary markets, it's hard to find employees to, sit your on-site properties. It's hard to find people to turn your units. It's hard to find maintenance staff. It's hard to find contractors and everything else involved. And so when I look at my market criteria, I want it to be in a substantial market. So I have my minimum criteria for markets. And for me, it's 1 million, 1 million in the metro area is my minimum criteria, because that's about where you have enough people, where you have, a really good, base of population where you can find the on-site staff that you need. You can find the maintenance, you can find the property managers, you can find everything you need to run a business. Once you get above that $1 million population, now it becomes, in a way, it's academic. In a way, it's looking for the projections, the markets that are moving the fastest, that are growing, where the rent's expected to grow. But I'll be honest, I think Daniel hit the nail on the head. You're going to get more information calling people who are in the market than you're going to get from all of these reports, because the reports all have a little bit of a bias, a little bit of a this is what we want to project. I mean, Marcus and Milchat's a brokerage. Okay. Yeah. What do brokerages want to tell people? Brokerages want to tell people that it's still a good time to transact. Okay. So when you start looking at these reports, they're not going to give you the whole story. And I've learned more. I'm working on a Houston deal, and by the time this podcast episode airs, it's going to be done. It's a 506B. But a guy in Houston, when I sent out the first email, I wish I would have used him as a resource, because he responded and he said, hey, this is in this metro, it's in this market, it's in this, it's that. Did you think about this? Were you aware of this? And, a friend of mine just went straight down the line, and it's like, he lives in Houston. He owns, 6,000 units in Houston, and he's taken the time to be able to say, this is what you are buying, and after going through everything he said, I'm like, okay, there's a lot there to unpack. Is it still a good deal? Yeah, I think it is, so don't underestimate the people who are there. Anyway, we are out of time. I wish we could keep on talking for another 2 hours, but, we are out of time. So one question for each of you to wrap things up. Daniel, you get to go first. How can listeners learn more about you?
Yeah. So I give away a lot of free stuff, so we have a free meetup that we do every other Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. So, this past Tuesday, we covered out-of-state investing. So I share with people, hey, this is my personal approach for out-of-state investing. Here's the step-by-step process on how I did it. Next meetup, which is not this Tuesday, but the next Tuesday, I'm going to be sharing how I talk to investors. So
Okay.
Even just Googling the Kwak brothers, real estate meetup, they'll be able to find our link, pretty easily. Just register for that. And then, you're more than welcome. It is free. It's complimentary. We typically go for about an hour 15. I have a 45-minute presentation typically, and I try to give, specific action items. And here's a step-by-step process. We don't sell anything there, right? So, I know a lot of different seminars that I've attended. Certainly, there's always a sales pitch at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have a coaching product, but I like to put my free stuff out there first, to build that relationship. So free meetup every other Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time. Next one, we're going to talk about how to raise money and talk to investors.
All right, sounds good. And we'll get a link to that in the show notes for anybody who's interested. And Hollis, same question for you. How can people learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. So you can check me out. This top QR code is to my LinkedIn profile. I'm super active there. That's how Brian and I connected. And this bottom QR code, you can, or just go to the website, my website at 24capitalgroup.com/diary. And what I'm doing there is trying to give back to the community a little bit, where I'll ask you a couple of questions for a survey, and then you'll get a gift card, a $5 gift card to donate to the charity of your choice. My plan is to give away $1,000 before the end of the year. So the more people that scan the code or go to the link, the more charitable giving we'll do. So if you want to find me, I'm at on LinkedIn, William Hollis, or just go to this website here, 24capitalgroup.com/diary. That's a special link just for Brian's listeners.
Yeah, I was saying diary. That's a really, really strong name there. Way to go with that one. So
Where did I get it from?
Yeah, I know, right? I know. So great minds think alike is what I was thinking. So I'll have a link to Hollis's LinkedIn profile. I'll also have a link to his website in the show notes. If you're watching it on YouTube, just pull up your phone. If you're not watching it on YouTube, you should check out the YouTube channel as well. Speaking of YouTube channels, while you're on YouTube, check out the Kwak brothers. They're, heads and shoulders above the Diary of an Apartment Investor YouTube channel right now. So check that out while you're on YouTube. Anyway, thanks guys for joining the show today. Very much appreciate it, and hope to talk again soon.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure to subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community yet, which we call the Tribe of Titans, you are missing out. Get 30 days free by clicking the link in the description to this episode, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.